It is really good to be with you again and to get to enjoy another Sunday here at Staidans. So thank you for the invitation to come, and I will be here with you next Sunday as well as we have our worship service and then enjoy lunch and the annual meeting together. And we've come to recognize that as a time where we can appreciate each other and all the things that happen, and we can laugh and plan and consider and work towards the future. And so it'll be good to be back with you next week. A little update from me. I have been, as I said at the beginning of the service, the chaplain at Fraser Valley Institution, and at the end of March, chaplaincy is going through a big change in that the company that chaplains currently work for will conclude its contract with the Correctional Service of Canada, and a new company will begin on April the 1st. And so what that means for almost all the chaplains is that they're going to just transfer from doing the job they're doing for one employer to doing the same job for another employer. But I'm going to make a change in that and be leaving Fraser Valley Institution to become the regional director or regional coordinator of chaplaincy for Bridges of Canada, so that I will not work in any one prison, but I will instead be working to supervise all the chaplains in federal prisons in British Columbia. So that's one on Vancouver Island, and then the others spread out through the Fraser Valley as far out as the Agassiz and Harrison Hot Springs area, where there are two different prisons. So that's going to be a change for me. One change will be that I will work from home, and another change will be that I will work Monday to Friday. And another change, and the one that I'm not looking forward so much to, is that I won't each day be going inside a prison. And as I'm preparing for this change, I'm wrestling with the fact that that's going to be a loss for me, because I love people who are in prison and people who work there, and so I will apply that love to their well-being and their benefit through working with the chaplains who care for them, and by being in periodically into each site to see people and to support them and care for them. So that's just a little bit of an update from my side of things in terms of what is going on.
Bruce, would you mind unmuting your thing, please? It's muted.
So you could hear me?
No.
No, but so that way you could hear me.
Yes, we could.
What?
At the top.
There we are. There we are. That is different. Did you hear anything of what I just said?
Yes.
Did you all smile when I said that? It's like the beginning of the service when the minister stopped working away with the microphone, and he says there's something wrong with this microphone, and people they can't really hear, but they know what they're supposed to say, and also with you. But hopefully there's nothing wrong with the microphone and nothing wrong with me, and we'll go on from there. No, I could feel it, so I'll stand back here where I'm safe. So we don't have a working microphone tumbling down the steps. Oh dear. Thank you, Marianne. Hello, you two. Anybody else needing to leave in tears at this point? I remember our oldest, Emma, who's 16 and who isn't here today, so I can tell any story I want about her. She, when she was little and we were at the church in Langley, I was telling the children's story, and I said, now it's time for you to go to Sunday school, and she just started to cry. I don't want to go to Sunday school. And she wailed all the way out the aisle. Oh dear. I do understand that this morning we read a passage that you had read together last Sunday. That last Sunday was Transfiguration Sunday, the Sunday before, the first Sunday during Lent, which is today. And so today we are reading that again, coupled with the story that comes immediately following. And I understand from Lori that you did not read that story last week, correct? And I have put them both before us this morning, not to go back and correct what Lori would have said about the Transfiguration, but when two stories go together, there's characteristically some kind of reason. There's a structure and a shape to these books that we read, and the author has put things together purposefully. And when you read these two stories, the story of the Transfiguration and the story that comes after, the story of the father with his son who is so terribly ill, you realize fairly quickly that these are not the same kind of story, right? I mean, they're striking in their difference. You have to kind of wonder what is the similarity between them, or what is the point of connection. But I mean, first of all, the differences between them are so dramatic. Did you want to? Okay. The differences between them are just so dramatic. It's hard to see that, because you've got on the one side you've got this glorious picture, and then the other one that is equally grim. And if we unpack that for a little bit, I think you'll see. I mean, Jesus goes up the mountain. This is the mountaintop experience, right? Where did we get that expression? Take a good look at Luke chapter 9. That's a prime example. Jesus goes up the mountain, and he takes Peter, James, and John with him, and he has gone to pray, because this is a pivotal time in his ministry. And it is in that experience at the top of the mountain that he chooses yet again to follow the path that has been set for him, to live out his identity as the one sent to save the world, and goes to Jerusalem, and therefore enters into that process of giving himself up for us. But while he's on the mountaintop praying, of course, this remarkable thing happens, and he is transfigured, which is surely an understatement for what it is that actually happened. His face begins to shine with a heavenly radiance, and his clothes take on the same kind of brilliance. And so there he is praying on the mountain, bathed in light, exuding light. And at that time, Moses and Elijah, the two great heroes of the faith, come to join him, and the three of them speak together. And so we have the glory showing through Jesus. We have heavenly visitors. We have this beautiful radiance all around. I mean, this is a scene of heaven on earth almost. It's that kind of image. And Peter, Luke hastens to add, not knowing what he says, wow, let's make this last forever. I know, there's three of us, there's three of you, each of us will build one of you a little place to live in, and you can stay here and shine, and we will stay here and watch. And it will be fantastic. What could we want? And if this were going to be the end of the story, perhaps that would have been the way it ended. But it's not the end of the story, because they are talking about something very future tense. They're talking about Jesus' departure, which he is about to accomplish. And so they're talking about something that's going on. And so here is this beautiful, beautiful picture. And then we go from heaven to hell in one verse. It just turns, and the picture becomes dramatically different. It says the next day, Jesus, James, Peter, and John were going back down the mountain, and when they got down the mountain, they came to a large crowd, and a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher,
I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child. Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks, and it convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. And it is a dramatic, pointed contrast between all the harp music that was happening up here and those long, slow, low tones that the movies use to tell us that something is going to happen. This is the point as Jesus approaches the cloud, where we see the scene of the wine glass getting tipped over and the wine spilling. And it's something is going to happen, and it's not good. And what a situation this man and this boy were living through. Parents, understand the way that you look at your children and see in them their future and yours. You see in them your legacy. You see in them what you are going to leave in this earth. And this man looked at his son, his only son, and saw those things, but saw also this confounding situation. This boy had an illness. It sounds to us like epilepsy. And as convulsions, all kinds of things going on. But Luke and the people of his day attributed it to an evil spirit. Perhaps, who's to say? Certainly there was something terribly, terribly wrong. And just look at what happens, because it says that suddenly this happens. There's no warning. We can be going on our way through our day as much as we ever have a day because of this thing that goes on. We can just be doing what we're normally doing. Maybe he's carrying the food to the table, and all of a sudden the spirit seizes him and he begins to convulse. And he would fall to the ground. And he would... my daughters each had seizures when they were little, and I remember the experience of being with them. And when it happened for each of them, I was alone with them. And I remember watching as they lay on the ground and their bodies arched and their arms moved and their legs went rigid and their heads knocked. Oh, I don't know if there's been anything more terrifying. And that was for them just once or twice until they were about 3 or 4. And there's this thing called a febrile seizure that young children get, and it doesn't do any lasting damage. And the doctor told me each time after I went in the ambulance to the hospital, they said, you don't have to do this until it lasts, 5 minutes. And I said, do you expect me to wait 5 minutes with my daughter all alone while she is doing this? No, I said, I need someone to be with me, to bear it with me. And this man, right, because the spirit would just take his boy at any moment, many times a day, and he would writhe and convulse until he foamed at the mouth. And you can imagine how he would have been gritting his teeth. And this is exhausting for my little girls. They would sleep for 24 hours after this. And this little boy would have had no rest, and it would maul him, he says. So that, no doubt he's just moving and scraping himself, and his body would have been covered with scars, and with healing wounds, and with open wounds, and infected wounds. And it's just happened again and again and again. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I wonder if Peter and James and John said, can we not just go back up the mountain? Can we not just go back to where we were? It was so good then. And look what's happening here. We can feel something of what that was like. The man didn't wait till he had his private moment with Jesus, but as soon as Jesus was within earshot, it sounds like, he was yelling already, "Look at my son." I asked your disciples, and they, like everybody else, can't do anything. And then, to add to the drama of the whole situation, while this man is bringing his little boy, it happens. And the little boy and his father had no future to look to and no present to enjoy. And their lives were taken up with this thing they could not predict, and they could not explain, and they could not rid themselves of. And it was for them hell on earth. As for Peter, James, and John, the experience on the mountain had been heaven on earth. If we could only have one, we know which we'd choose. But we can't. You and I have our own experiences that in one way or another would be the worst times that we live through. And we can well think of Dickens with this juxtaposition of these two settings side by side. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. What we see, though, as we look into the weaving of these two together, what we see is that Jesus deliberately leaves the one to go to the other. He deliberately leaves this to go and accomplish his departure, which takes him straight down the mountain. Down from where the air is so clear and the view is so grand and the water is so pure, down to the messiness of life. From the peace to the chaos. And from the order to the disarray. From the clear sense of purpose and of what is going on in life to the we can't understand a single part of this. And Jesus goes. He goes, and Luke weaves these two together to show us that Jesus, in accomplishing his mission as our Savior, as the deliverer, goes and joins himself to us, and he doesn't skirt the things that happen to us, but he steps into the midst of it all, and he rebukes the spirit and sets the boy free. And what does it tell us? It tells us, first of all, that Jesus, in this story, moving to that story, to all the other stories, that Jesus embraces this fact that suffering is a part of life. That life does not always go right, but he embraces that suffering is part of living, and for him to live would mean suffering, and so he went to Jerusalem. And so when we begin to think, oh, things like this shouldn't happen, we have to question ourselves and ask why. Because isn't suffering part of life? And yet it is redeemed. Because Jesus, in coming to this boy and his father, redeems the moment. He redeems the suffering and exhibits himself to be the one who here shone with heavenly glory and here acted with heavenly power. So that he was the one who brings about redemption in the moment. His disciples didn't know how to do it. None of the other authorities the man had turned to knew what to do, but Jesus knew what to do. And so he acted. And so Jesus, we see, embraces suffering as part of human life, and Jesus redeems suffering. And Jesus goes into those experiences that are the darkest of times, the worst of times. That Jesus does not present to us a glowing, happy paint-by-numbers version of life that looks like it has a semblance of reality, but as we look, we realize that there's no particular detail in it, and he hasn't, he's not showing us the depths. Jesus goes to the depths of life with us, to the very lowest moments, unhesitatingly into that situation. When I go out today to Abbotsford after our service, and I go join with the women there to celebrate, to worship, we will celebrate and rejoice in the fact that our God is one who sets us free. Right? That we are able to know ourselves, and we are able to admit our failings and our weaknesses, and we are able to admit the ways in which we have each gone through hell on earth. And I'll tell you, those dear women have. In their different experiences, they have touched things that have not come close to me, and to be honest, I don't know how they emerge from some of that. These are women who have been trafficked for one reason or another. They've been exploited in any number of ways. They have been abandoned by people that they needed to trust. They have been told that they are completely on their own, and then they have taken the situation into their own hands and acted often just to see what they could do to preserve themselves one more day. Not to exonerate them, because they are guilty of their crimes, but you can understand when it gets to be so desperate. Like this man in this story, he will have tried everything. Right? This is not I'd like someday to solve the Rubik's Cube, and so every once in a while I pick it up and sort of spin it around a little bit and see if no, not today. Right? Another time, when I come across it again, I'll try it I'll try it again. I've never made it, I probably never will, and frankly, I don't care. That is not how this man pursued his confounding situation. But it was always before his eyes, and it was always in the front of his mind. And Jesus stepped into the middle of it. So it puts an end to our fear that we would be alone at that worst time. You know what the worst time is that's happened to you, or the worst time is that you can imagine. This story shows us Jesus in the middle of the scene, and we will not be alone. And it shows us that Jesus embraces suffering in his life, reminds us to acknowledge that there is suffering in ours, and teaches us not to shirk the suffering around us, and not to sidestep it, but when we see it, to stand with the person. Because sometimes, if all we can do is stand with them, then that is enough. Say, I will be with you. I will not leave you. And in that, we act out who Jesus is in the midst of it. And so we have this story, these two stories, with the hinge in between them, where we turn from joy to sorrow, where we turn from light to darkness, where we turn from the future to an all-consuming present. And we see that he creates a future beyond it, a whole new life for that boy and his father. Because Jesus creates life. He interrupts death and creates life. So let us count on him to do the same for us, for those whom we love, for those whom we do not know. Let us cling to Jesus, who comes down the mountain and does not stay there, but joins himself to us and then gives himself for us. Amen.